morning. I'm very happy to be here to talk to you a little bit about at least one medieval disaster. And it's fun to be here because I'm familiar with the book series because I have a third grader who loves them. So there's no I Survived series yet, maybe someday, right, about the Black Death. But that was a major medieval disaster that I want to tell you about. And I'm also going to use it as an excuse to tell you why it is really great to study history, why it's useful, but also why it's kind of fun. And so what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about this disease which swept through Europe and actually a lot of the world in the 14th century. So you might well say, like, why is it called the Black Death? Well, it was called that because it caused people's fingers and toes to blacken, and it caused them to have these swellings, especially often in their armpits, that turned black. And so when people saw this, that's what medieval people said. They said it's a form of Black Death because a lot of the people who caught this disease in the Middle Ages, they died. And we think between 30% and 50% of the people who lived in Europe died in the Middle Ages when this disease came. So that would be like if half the people in this room got sick and died, and the other half got sick but survived, right? So some people survived and others didn't. And what this black kind of swelling is it's the body trying to get better. So some people got better, but other people didn't. People in the Middle Ages didn't know why this disease came along. We now know there's a picture of the bacteria that causes this disease. So it's caused by a bacteria. That's a good thing for us because we have antibiotics now, right? So for the very, very few people in the United States who get this disease, they can go to the doctor and take some medicine and get better. But they didn't have that in the Middle Ages. So people got sick and in very large numbers, and they just couldn't figure out why. And they thought, we have to do something, right? It's just like in the I Survived series. They have to figure out what can they do to try to survive. So they came up with some different ideas. And this is one of the reasons why it's kind of interesting to study history, is because this reaction of people is probably not what we would do today. Some people said, oh, we must have this disease because we did something bad, and maybe God is angry at us. Because most people who lived in medieval Europe, they were Christian, and so they believed that God was angry. And they said, if we show God we're super sorry, maybe he'll take the disease away, or we won't die from the disease. And so there were groups of people in a lot of Europe who went around and they whipped themselves. Now, on the one hand, you could think about this. You'd say, why would people whip themselves to make a disease go away? Well, this is why historians like to ask questions. We like to look at this and not say, oh, these people are kind of silly. That's not going to do them any good. But instead to say, why would they do this? And one thing that we notice as historians about when this terrible disease came is that people may have had some strange ideas about what to do, but they definitely tried to fix their problem. They tried to think of ways they could survive. So this was maybe not the most effective way. Historians still don't know why in some places people survived, right? In some cities they didn't have this problem, and others they did. And I like to tell my students right here at NIU, these are the kinds of questions, right, that remain to be answered about the past. We don't know everything, and that's why it's kind of exciting to do history. It's not like it's all known yet. And so it's something to kind of look at. But one suggestion is that we notice if we go back and we look at what people wrote down back in the Middle Ages, some cities said, we're not going to let travelers in. We're not going to let people visit our city. And so when they did this, it helped keep the disease out in some cases, not all. So this can kind of help explain it. So they don't know enough about science yet. They don't have microscopes to know about bacteria yet. But they do realize it's people who seem to move around and bring the disease. So that was one thing they did that was effective, right? That worked in kind of helping some people survive this disaster. It's also interesting to kind of think about what are the effects as well. So plenty of people survived this disease, but unfortunately the disease kept coming back. So that into the later centuries, like for the next 200 to 300 years, this disease would come back in waves, and it would caused many, many people to become ill. And so historians, we want to look at this and think, how did this change the way people thought about the world? History's not just about like, oh, what happened, but it's also a way of kind of thinking about how do people think and how do people react to stuff. And so we like to look at like how their response, right? What do they do as a result? And this is an example. Lots of people in Europe began to make art like this, and they were always called the dance of death. And you can see the skeleton, maybe? The skeleton is dancing, and they think the skeleton's inviting these people to come dance with it and dance it away, these people away to their deaths. Medieval people, and then the people who followed them in what historians call the early modern period, this is like the 16th and 17th centuries, they did try to treat this disease. And we see more and more doctors. This is actually showing you a doctor. Now, I don't know how many of you would like to visit a doctor who wore a mask that looked like that. He looks kind of like a bird, right? So you might be like, why is he wearing that? It's because people developed a theory that the disease moved through the air. And I bet you all now know that you can catch, like, say, a cold if someone sneezes on you, right? So there are some things that can go through the air and make you sick. So they were starting to develop this idea that this was possible. And they thought, well, doctors have to protect themselves from bad air. And so they wore this strange mask. And the idea was it's keeping them from getting sick from their own patients. And the reason I show you this is it's especially appropriate on a day when you're going to talk about like, science, because a lot of historians, myself included, we would argue the Black Death did a lot to get the study of modern science going. Because when this disaster happened, people didn't just sit back and say, oh, well, you know, we're just going to have to do whatever. They persevered, like the people in the I Survived books, right? They said, what can we do? And they started to think about how does the disease spread? How can we help people who have it? And they start to develop ideas of medicine, and it's not so long, really, before someone invents a microscope, right? And suddenly they can learn all about what's really causing diseases like the Black Death. So all of this to say, in some ways, I think we can take the heroes of the I Survive books, right, as kind of a model, and we can persevere, right? Always to be looking for answers, always to be thinking about how does the world work, how did it work in the past, and how can we learn from that. So I hope that you guys all have a wonderful day exploring and learning about the past, and I really encourage you to keep reading about history, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.